So I took a different approach to this because I figured there's a lot of people in the room that probably know a lot about AI to where then I can, throw some issues and concerns that we have in the urban landscape and see what all the smart people think we can do with it. So I took it more from the management approach of how we're viewing our urban landscapes and a lot of the areas where we could be doing better and or completely fail. There we go. So what we're going to talk about is kind of tree management and urban landscape in general, kind of look at some of the issues that we have, how this relates to planting. So unlike natural areas, trees in the urban landscape aren't just, growing up in succession. We're planting them. A lot of times we're planting in places we shouldn't be. So the project that me and Howard were working on kind of helps get to the idea of planting trees in appropriate spaces. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on the website. Howard showed some slides on it earlier, but I'll go into a little bit more detail and we'll see if we can pull it up real quick just so you can kind of see what the interface looks like. And then just some thoughts on some applications for future uses of AI and urban trees, urban landscaping. And then there's a project at the end that I'm working on with another group that I'll mention. So I'm assuming everybody has some semblance of an understanding that trees provide some sort of benefits, health, environmental, economic, wildlife habitat, but they also pose risks. So my background, when I got started in grad school, had to do with trees and risk. So a lot of times we have either trees that are mismanaged, not managed at all, planted in places they should be planted, and there's some inherent level of risk associated with all of those activities surrounding trees in the urban landscape. So it comes down to public health and safety. We want to maximize these benefits, minimize the associated risks, minimize the management inputs. So if you plant a tree where it shouldn't be planted, potentially you're going to have to baby it a lot more through the establishment period than you would maybe a tree that's appropriately placed in a suitable site condition. So just to kind of put this contextually, more than 80% of the US population live in urban areas, and I think that number is getting even closer to 90% now. I just saw something the other day, so this is a little bit dated. But then basically we have about 3.8 billion trees to the tune of about 2.4 trillion in these urban forests. And it helps out with our energy cost reduction, so 2 billion annually. Carbon sequestration, so it's getting rid of those air pollution to the tune of about 3.8 billion. And then storage carbon to the tune of about 14 billion. So, lots of benefits we get from these trees, both from a health standpoint, aesthetics, but also these environmental benefits that equate to dollars and cents. So we see a lot of this in Florida. I mean, it's not just us, it's all over the world. We see this urban sprawl. And if you look, like, maybe there's some trees planted in there and it's not real apparent, but it does seem like the landscapes are getting smaller. The trees are either not there or closely compacted. I was just down in Fort Lauderdale for Thanksgiving, and I'm not even kidding. They had 3 mature shade trees and 2 large palms planted in about a 10 by 10 area in front of every single one of these condos. And I don't know if they've never seen a tree grow or just they're trying to sell as many trees as possible. The landscape is like, oh, we can put at least 50 trees in front of your bay window, but I don't know. So we got to, have the understanding that these trees are going to grow, and that in order to maximize these benefits, we need to make sure that the landscape plans that we're designing, are going to fit for the site. Not only now when you plant a tree, yeah, you might get 50 trees on that 10 by 10 spot, but what's that going to look like in 10 years, 20 years? Yeah. So having an understanding of how growth equates to these site conditions as well. And again, it comes down to those risks, benefits, and just the essential cost to manage these trees over their lifetime. So Florida population is expected to get to about 34 million people by 2070. I think right now we're about like 23 million, maybe slightly more. So that's a lot more people coming to this state in the next 50 years, 47 years. So what we're going to see as part of this is places that are already densely populated are going to become even more densely populated. Obviously, everybody wants to live next to the coast. That's why people come to Florida. And then also the center of the state, there's a lot more available land. So think areas like Ocala. Maybe the cost of living is a little bit cheaper down there compared to if you're from the coast, or maybe you're from New York or California. You come to Florida and you see a house for $300,000-$400,000, and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna buy 6 of them. So you're gonna see, pockets of the state that are just gonna explode with this urban sprawl, and we want to make sure that when this is happening, because we know it's going to happen, that we're planning accordingly with these landscapes with future growth and benefits in mind, and also the management that these municipalities are going to incur as a result. The other issue here is climate change. So we're going to see an increased frequency and intensity of natural disasters with this. So your hurricanes, your droughts, your fires, pest disease outbreaks. They were, anticipating somewhere between 2.7 and 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit increase. I heard just a couple of weeks ago that we're already going to hit that 3.6 and probably exceed it. I think the number that they said we could possibly even go up to on the high end now is like 5.4. Don't quote me on it, but it was considerably higher than what they were anticipating in the high end originally. And then there's also going to be some less precipitation. And we're going to see this shift kind of go from the south, north, and west. So, it's gonna change kind of the plant palette that we currently have. We got lots of problems. So just take Florida, for example. So if you start up in the top left to right, and then bottom left to right, you can see from 1980 all the way up to almost 2100 in the bottom right, how these hardiness zones are going to be shifting. That means species that were maybe only adapted for South Florida might be making their way up to Orlando at some point, stuff like that. So when we're thinking about planting trees moving forward, because municipalities are historically understaffed, underfunded, we want to make sure we're planting for future environments. So those, future climates, stuff like that. So there might be species that we're currently planting that we don't want to plant anymore moving forward. And there might be some species that we might consider planting in areas that, maybe they perform well in that, northern part of their range, and maybe they could withstand, maybe 100 miles further north or something like that in the future, to where it might be another tree that we have at our disposal to plant in our urban landscapes. Other thing we're seeing is just this increase in temperature. A lot of it's since the industrial age, but if you just look since about 1980, it's just been a continuous increase, and this only went up to 2020. This last year was the hottest year on record. So we're just continuing to see that trend of increased heat, along with, some of these drought-like conditions and those natural disasters we've been seeing in the news all the time. Florida, big thing we have is hurricanes are an issue down here. And we are seeing that increased intensity. It seems like the frequency, at least since I moved to the state, is maybe tempered off a little bit, but when they do hit, the cost of them has been continuing to go up, the damage associated with them. I just heard on NPR not too long ago that there's still people in the panhandle from Michael that have never got paid out for their insurance. So it's problematic on a lot of different levels. And just, on the tree level side of things, if we can start planting species that are more storm resistant, that'd be beneficial. So that's one more thing we can feed into these data sets as far as, with some sort of plant selector. And then just the urban environments in general. I know there's been a lot of talk today about, what species would work well in different sites. We have a lot of variability across sites as far as, size of planting space, soil type, soil compaction, the different climates in the different areas that you're going to be planting in. So there's a lot of information that can be fed into these systems to really make it super specific as far as the site condition variables that could, maybe make or break whether or not a species would work well in that area. So it's that right tree, right place mentality. And this is the first thing you need to consider before you, dig a hole or put a tree in the ground. You want to make sure that you're matching the species and its future growth to the current site conditions. And again, it comes down to maximizing those benefits, minimizing the inputs. The other thing to factor in here, there is that level of subjectivity. Someone mentioned, the beauty aspect earlier. Everybody has their favorite tree, whether it be because, they like some aesthetic of it, like flowering, or maybe it's got nice fall color if you're up north or whatever. But then there's other factors that go into there, like, cold hardiness, whether it's native or not. Some people really like native plants. To that point, somebody had mentioned, the quantity of native plants is sometimes hard to find. It's hard to find native plant growers, stuff like that. The quality is also problematic. We have a study going on right now, and we have 6 natives that we got. They all came from South Florida because it's a hardiness zone study. One's worse than the next. Like, some of them don't even have a root system, and the ones that do, I mean, my hand's probably 5 times the size of the root system on the tree. So, I mean, the quality is the other thing. So when we do have maybe a system in the future that can say, hey, this grower has, this number of this species on hand right now, I think there should be some sort of rating system, almost like when you go to a dentist. My dentist has the worst rating system in town, but it's 2 blocks from my house. So I can go in there because I don't have to take as much time out of my day to go get my teeth cleaned. Yeah, I still go. But if you had some sort of rating system associated with that, then you could be like, okay, maybe this person does have that species, but maybe we don't want to go there because they don't actually care much about the grades and standards or high quality nursery stock, something like that. So just, another piece to consider. And then, when you finally do pick that species, you got your site, you want to make sure you're checking the site out. Things above ground, below ground, you need to make any modifications to the site, management considerations, things like that. And all that kind of feeds into the project that me and Howard kind of got synced up on. So Howard and a previous professor from our department, Dr. Gilman, they created this site back in the 90s. And it was really ahead of its time because it essentially put the expert on the screen in front of them to where you run through just hundreds of questions, and there's hundreds of rules associated with those questions, where Howard showed the big spider web, I like to call it earlier, just all these decision trees that kind of go on. And essentially it gets you to, okay, here's all the questions we're going to ask to make sure that we have an understanding of what your site is like. And then here's the list of trees that, are suitable for that site. And I think that's a starting place. I think there's a lot more information that could be built in, a lot more visual and like technical things related to the AI that would make it more user friendly or more attractive to users to use. Because right now it's a lot of words and stuff like that. It's great for what it does, and there's tons of public interest in it. That's part of the reason we sought out the grant to bring this back, was because there was such value for a system like this.
How many users do you know?
So I tried to understand that when I was writing the grant, and they did not have it set up for Google Analytics prior to it going off the line, because it was based on Flash. And so when Flash went offline, it basically kind of didn't function anymore. But the best I could understand was all of the EDIS fact sheets that feed into it. There's about 1,000 tree fact sheets. There's about 1 million people a year across 150 countries. So I got the Google Analytics for the EDIS fact sheets. So there's a lot of traffic as far as those go. Hence why gales were stolen up in Canada. But so yeah, like I said, useful tool. There are other websites that kind of help you select trees, but they don't ask that questions. So the expert system is missing. It's very basic. The other thing is, this one's specific to Florida, although it does have a ton of other species that, they'll grow up in Chicago or Boston or wherever. But it does include a lot of cultivars and kind of oddball species that, you wouldn't find in some of these other systems because they're more your generic, here's the top 100 species or whatever that would grow in your area. But again, it's getting, making sure you're planting the right tree in the right place. So here's those EDIS fact sheets. There's 676 that are trees, and the others are, there's 403 tree and shrub. So there's about 1,000 in total, because some of the shrub ones don't actually apply to the tree selector, but there are trees mixed into that one. So a lot of information built in. Here's an example of what one of those looks like. And, all the variables that are found in these individual fact sheets kind of get built into the expert system for these rules and these questions. And we went in and we updated the stuff that could potentially change, things like hardiness zone, invasive potential, sometimes scientific names changed. So anything that needed to be updated, we worked on doing that. And it's one of those things that needs to be just at least checked in on every 5 or so years to see if there's any changes. All right, so this is the website. So you can find trees based off your site conditions. You can search trees based off of, different tree variables, and then you can try to identify a tree. So it's basically like a dichotomous key. So there's tons of different things here, from the environmental factors to, the foliage, flowering. Just lots of different stuff you can put in here. The one thing I always like warn people, if you put too many things into the system, odds are you're not going to get something back, because there is a little bit of room for human error, as far as you might think you know exactly what you're looking at, but you don't always. So I always caution, just maybe stick with a couple of things and test it out. Not that the system's wrong, but just that a lot of times people misidentify stuff. So that's the dichotomous key portion of it. And then here's different characteristics of the site itself. So, you can pick different hardiness zones here, light requirements. You can pick, different counties, pest resistance. All this information's fed in here to hopefully, guide the user down the path of selecting the right tree for the right place, or, identifying what trees they have, or just providing information specific to certain species. So lots of different stuff there. And then lastly, so this is the expert system, and Howard had a couple slides on this, but you can, every little bit of information that's on those fact sheets, you can run through here to generate a list. So if we just pick something just to go through here, so I picked hardiness zone, say more than 20 inches of rain a year, say no vandalism. Sunlight exposure, say it's got direct sun for more than 6 hours. Trees planted in the ground. I'm going through this quick just to show you the list essentially. You can play with it if you want in your spare time. Let's say the soil pH is that. Sandy soils, not compact, drains moderately, water tables more than 18 inches below. It's got irrigation during establishment. It's an urban site. It's a residence, and we'll say near the house. No swimming pool. We'll select overhead wires because it should give us small species at that point. So then basically here, this gives you a little bit more information and things to consider. In this case, it has to do with that overhead wire situation, about saying, you got to have a small tree or you might have to prune it. And let's see here. So we want to select a tree that will not interfere with those wires. So again, it should give us a small tree. How close to the wires? Say it's 30 feet up. Street light, no. No. No lake or pond. Sure, we'll consider some maintenance questions. There's going to be your information related to that. Messy tree, no. Tells you more about messy trees. So you can see there's a lot of questions going through here. I've seen it go through as quickly as like maybe 25 or 30 sometimes, and sometimes it'll go longer than that. No drooping branches. Exclude one breaking. No, we'll have one that we prune when we're younger, or when they're younger. No pest sensitivities. Doesn't matter about native. So then all the information that we clicked on up to this point, it kind of synthesizes into this. And then
this is what's called the explanation.
And then here's the
all
list.
these things.
So these are all the trees. So you can either select common name or scientific name. What you'll notice is that sometimes on the common name side, you'll have a longer list, and that's because some of these trees have multiple common names. But either way, you get a list of, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe 30 trees here that would be suitable for that site. And I don't remember all the variables we picked. The one that was kind of jumping out was, wanting to make sure it was under 30 feet, so it wouldn't be an issue. And that's at maturity, we did power lines. So that was kind of that in a nutshell. You can kind of play with that, get a chance. The other thing we did is never before was it able to be used on your phone. So now you can use it on your phone, which is a nice application if you're, landscape architect, landscaper, like arborist, like anybody who's out there doing some sort of consulting or planning on site. You can kind of pull this up and be like, kind of to Gail's point earlier, like, hey, it'd be nice if we had an idea of, what else would be suitable for the site while we're at the nursery. They can do this while they're out there when they're kind of making some notes and talking with customers and stuff like that. So making it more user friendly. Again, it goes to that right tree, right place. So the other project I'll just touch on here in one slide. So we were originally going to be using photogrammetry, and it is labor intensive. It was the cheaper of the two options rather than buying a LiDAR unit. But we actually found that we are going to be able to rent a LiDAR unit from NHERI Rapid. I think it has something to do with NSF. Anyway, the point of the matter is we are wanting to scan these trees and make 3D models of them and put them in a wind tunnel. So we were going to use smaller trees because if you try and scan a larger tree, the logistics of that with leaf area covering all the different architectural parts of the above ground portion of the tree is problematic. Use smaller trees, you can actually just remove the leaves or wait till they go dormant, and then you get a better idea of the structure when you go to scan it. And the other issue here is we're going to print these into 3D models. In order to scale them down to a size that we wanted to where the roots and the above ground portion made sense for the overall project, we had to use kind of a smaller tree anyway. So we're going to scale them down to about 4.5 feet. We're going to do some static pull tests on them to run some numerical modeling simulations as far as stability, because ultimately we're going to put these in some soil boxes, which we'll talk about in a second. Once we do the static pull test, we're going to cut the tree down and then take a 90-inch tree spade, harvest it out, clean all the roots off, and essentially you have to cut everything off that's smaller than 3 centimeters because it just kind of muddies the scan that. So not only will we have a 3D model of the above ground portion of the tree, but we'll also have one of the root system. And then we're going to put these in these soil boxes with a whole bunch of sensors on them. We're going to look at soil moisture content and then apply different wind speeds to them in a wind tunnel. And we're basically going to look at the soil root interface to look at things like soil cracking and root slippage and stuff like that. But we just submitted the grant to NSF yesterday or the day before. So hopefully, with any luck, we'll be doing this next year. But there's been, some work that's kind of pieced together smaller portions of this, but none that have kind of done the full thing. So we're hopeful that that'll work out. And then just some things that came to mind, like when I was thinking about this, different talks with Howard, just different issues I have in general, that'd be nice if there was, some solution for it outside of, human subjectivity or mismanagement or a lack of being able to manage because of funding, stuff like that in these kind of municipal urban landscape type contexts. So there's obviously been a lot of talk today about, landscape design possibilities, making designs that are more sustainable for some of these future environments that we're going to see with climate change. The other thing is tree inventories. I could see this easily being something to where you fly a drone over top of the city and able to collect these large data sets of these tree models. I already know there's some AI out there that is able to ID trees based off of like the drive-by inventories. So maybe there's other aspects that could be, or features that could be added on to some application like that. Tree health and risk assessments. I'm thinking you could probably train enough tree defects in a system for then maybe you are driving by or doing some aerial type of scan where maybe they could identify the worst of the worst, to where then the municipality who has one person on staff that's actually going out there and assessing these trees would prioritize the ones that are deemed to be the worst of the worst. Currently, we do that with drive-by assessments, but it still takes a long time to drive, your streets. I mean, it's quicker than walking, but maybe just one more way to expedite the process. And maybe increase the efficacy of it, because when you drive by, you're only seeing one vantage point. The plant growth models, which has been touched on quite a bit, I think that would be very valuable for that. The concept I said earlier about, people might plant 50 trees, but they're not keeping in mind what those 50 trees are going to look like in that 10-foot by 10-foot area moving forward. So if you can give them these designs with these growth models to kind of show them like, hey, if you plant that tree over here, this is what it would look like in 10 years, 20 years. Because then it also, you could take into consideration some of the future management that would go along with planting that tree there. Because a lot of times people are a little bit averse to pruning their trees proactively, and a lot of times it's reactive rather than proactive. So just other things to consider when people are making decisions on designs. Searchable fact sheets, like Howard had mentioned. The other thing, so I do a lot of industry training. I could see some applications for, we'll use pruning, for example. If we had a ton of 3D models of trees, rather than going out and, pruning a whole bunch of trees, which actually doesn't happen for, any sort of credentials we currently have now, because of the limitations of, you can't have somebody going out there just pruning a whole bunch of trees, and how do you standardize it? So we just came up with a pruning credential in the state, but it's more theoretical. You're not actually going out there and pruning the trees because of those limitations. So I think if you could come up with some sort of 3D model pruning system to where these look like real trees, you train the system on, here's the different types of cuts, here's the dose, and here's the objective. And I think you could go through and have a couple people come to a consensus, essentially, the experts, the trainers, whatever, to where then you could actually turn this into a credential or a training tool that industry groups would buy.
I think they've developed a tool like that before, right? Not for pruning, but for, you guys had some educational tool I saw for like wireline, power lines.
Ines, yeah.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was real neat, and I think that could be a template for what you're talking about.
Yeah, training industry professionals,
In VR.
and there is a big interest to do that.
Yeah, and I know in my industry too, like they would jump all over that.
Really?
But yeah, so and then the other thing, and this kind of encompasses a little bit of everything I've talked about here and just all the issues, but I'd like to at some point take the tree selector trees or Florida Trees website that me and Howard worked on, and like take that to the next level and incorporate some of these additional features to where it's just
And integrate with.
yeah.
Yeah.
You guys do it,
For sure.
There's lots of opportunities here.
Um.
And then just to kind of sum it up, all the different things I talked about are ultimately going to affect the success of trees in these urban areas. It's not just one thing. Quality of nursery stock all the way up to whether or not those trees are getting managed, whether they're planted properly, all that stuff, the design aspects, making sure the right trees in the right place, which I've beat that dead horse plenty of times throughout this talk. But, I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and I didn't understand. I know when the Hypergator was coming here, like, what does AI have to do with me? Our department chair was like, hey, you guys should try to get involved with AI stuff. I'm like, I do tree stuff. And like, the more conversations I have like this and the more of these things I attend, there's definitely some opportunities there. So I think, there's a lot of things we could move towards in the future as long as the permit. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.